Okay, so today we're going to talk about shading eyes. Okay? We had discussed a week or two ago eyes and their physical structure, and that essentially I have a larger, like, super ball sitting inside a larger cup of my skull, right? So, what that means in terms of shadows is that my eyebrow and this top edge of my forehead will be a light area typically. My face will lighten up again down here in my upper cheekbone, but the general area around my eyes typically will be darker or in shadow because my eyes sit back a little bit in my head. Now, hopefully you've taped your grid plastic over your photo in such a way that you can get it out of the way. I find that I need to continue to reference the grid, but I also find that I find it really helpful to be able to get this shiny cover off my photograph working. So I'm going to get that shiny cover off, and the very first thing that I'm going to do is do something that I call like loading value, right? I'm simply starting in the actual edge of my hair because I know I'm going to have to shade that part, and I'm working really, really lightly with my pencil, as lightly as I possibly can. So I'm just sort of letting the pencil, you can see it's like super loose in my hand. Where I've been on my paper, there's almost no, like from the distance to the camera, it's really hard for you to see that pencil that's on there. If I get a good rhythm of this going, I can go ahead and cover my entire face this way, because it turns out your whole face will have, it's all shades of gray. There will be nothing lighter than this. Nothing the actual like finished gray or finished off-white of this sheet of paper. So I'm for sure gonna go straight across this area where my eyes are, because that's the feature we're gonna focus on today, our eyes. So you can see that that's just be covered with pencil. And now I'm gonna keep my photo super close, and I'm just gonna come in, and I want to replicate the values that are here as closely as possible. So I do like to start with some darks, because those darks kind of start to balance out the rest of your drawing. So my pupil is a dark area, so I'm working in soft circles here. Also wearing some eyeliner, so I have this dark kind of line at the edge of my eye. So you can see I've added that in. Those are the two like darkest areas. And then here there's kind of a shadow in my eye. The outer edge of my eye is a little darker than the inside part of my eye. Be careful to skip this little white section here so that my eye looks shiny. And then I'm just going to try to match the gray to the gray in my photo as much as possible. So I'm going to look back at my photo. You can see I'm holding my finger here on my photograph of where I'm supposed to be looking. Your eye, the eye is surprisingly shadowed. Very little actual white. Particularly out here, there's a fairly dark area here in my tear duct. Oh, this section of my eye is fairly shaded. Like I said before, there is very little about your face that will be really, really light in value. Here at this bottom edge of my eye, these are my eyelashes, but really it just looks like a kind of a jaggedy shadow at the bottom of my eye. So I'm just including that as a jaggedy shadow. I have another shadow here. Just kind of a lighter area around the bottom of my tear duct. A little bit of a shadow here in the edge of my nose that I outlined earlier. So this starts to connect here. So I'm working in soft circles. I'm shading very lightly. It's always easier to go back and make areas darker than it is to go back and make areas lighter. If you find, put a dark here. This is a pretty dark shadow. And I do find that sometimes that can help kind of balance a little bit. So I have a shadow here from my hair that falls on, which feels a little strange, but it will match the photo. So not worried about my hair right now at all. I'm just trying to look for the shadows that are here on my face. And put those down in my drawing. My eyebrow is a little bit darker. Shade your eyebrow. You can see that I've kind of started to shade that in a little bit. So partially that's shading, and partially we're going to leave a little bit of hairy texture with a little bit of a, going to leave a little bit of a linear. I'm also looking for where my eyebrow is like lighter and darker, because of course that will help it to look more like me, which is the point. If you end up with your kneadable eraser to lift that area, so I can take a chunk, just a piece of my kneadable eraser, and if I decide that I've gotten something a little darker than I wanted it to be, I can just simply press that eraser just down onto my shading. I'm not rubbing, I'm just simply pushing it straight down. It always reminds me a little bit of playing with silly putty, that you push it just in and it lifts up and lightens a whole section of the pencil that's there. So if I decide that this shadow's a little too intense, I can come back and I can soften the edge of that shadow with my kneaded eraser. So I'm going to continue here now out into some of these beneath my eye, where I've drawn the lines, right? I outlined some of these shadows when I made my contour line drawing. Where it was darker, where it was lighter. So I'm going to try to shade with where they're darker and where they're lighter. Some of these shadows here now start to be a part of the bridge of my nose. The facial features are super interconnected, so it can be hard to do them like kind of one at a time. Again, if I decide that that seems a little dark, I can come back and I can just tap that with my kneaded eraser, lighten that up a little bit, kind of spin that. Gonna do a little bit more here, the edge of my hair, just to sort of check some of those values. I think this here needs to be darker, which means that the shadow that's going down the side of my face from that piece of hair that's sticking out needs to be a little darker too. Okay. The last kind of thing that I'm always going to do is just to go back and just refine any of my shadows. I'm looking back at my photo, seeing that this needs to be a little darker here. The great thing is that when you go back and deepen some of your shadows, you have that underline value underneath. Trying to get rid of all of my contour line and just turn them into shadow shapes. The very last thing I'm going to do on my eye is my eyelashes. Okay. I'm also being careful to keep my hand off of my shaded part. So sometimes a piece of scratch paper, a piece of drawing paper you have in your folder will work. just so that we're not kind of smearing that as we go. You usually have a shadow, so you can see here I'm going to move to my other eye. This is the more shadowed side of my face. So I have a little bit more pronounced shadow here. So just for instance, I'm going to shade that in. I have a little bit, you'll always have a little bit of a shadow here. The top of your bridge of your nose. Remember, your nose is a cone, and so it's always going to be a little darker at the top than it is down the center. So I'm trying to look at these shadows that are coming out and across the space between my two eyes. And I want to make sure that I'm getting this dark enough so that it makes sense. Oops. I got that a little too dark. So I can move across here to my second eye, and I'm going to start the exact same way. I'm going to start here in my pupil. I'm going to be careful to leave that white area so that my eyes look shiny and real. Shade across here where I can see again that darker line of my eye makeup. I'm going to shade because my eye will always be in shadow. I'm going to make sure that I shade my tear duct. That's a really common thing to miss on your drawing are your tear ducts. So make sure that you've drawn all those little shapes inside there. So if I kind of blow up a drawing of my eye here, I have the shine spot and my pupil. I have my eyelid line, which is another easy thing to forget about. And then usually has a little ledge that we can see that'll overlap your eye. And then here is the outer edge of the white of my eye. And then this is my tear duct here, this section that sits out here, this. You want to make sure that you're including the tear duct in your drawing and your eyelid line. Those are both super important like features of your eye. You also want to look for any like shadow shapes or edge kind of shadow line, because again, that's what will make your eye look three-dimensional. So make sure before you start shading that if an eyelid line on your photo, you've given that eyelid line onto your drawing, and then also that your tear duct is in there. Both super important to making a realistic looking eye. I'm going to come back here now. This eye is a little bit darker in this outer corner. It's sitting in the shadow of my hair, you know, which is right here. I drew this eyelid line a little wrong. Try to fix that. Tear duct. I'm going to go ahead and shade now the iris part of my eye, darker around the outer edge, making sure that I'm just trying to match that value that's there. It'll be darker at the top because there's always just a little bit of a shadow that's in your eye from your eyelid, your eyelash. Underneath here again, I have this little bit of a darker shadow that's actually my lashes. My eyebrow on this side is a little darker. This is the shadowed side of my face. Typically when we take a photo, you know, we end up with one side that's catching more light than the other side. And so there'll be one side that things are a little bit more clear, other side that things are a little bit more in shadow. So this is my more inside. I'm just being careful to watch where those shadows change. I need to deepen. There's this odd shaped shadow here. Nose a little bit that I had lightened up, but now I've darkened again. So you'll see that those shadow shapes kind of go back and forth as you continue to work on your drawing. The very last are my eyelashes. Just trying to finish facial shadows here. So now, I don't think this one's good enough, but what you're gonna do for your eyelashes is you're going to look at what do you see of your eyelashes in your actual photo, okay? Some people will just see kind of a dark, like shadow shape at the top of, that's what you need to draw. You will find that a sharpened pencil works really nicely for eyelashes. I see right here, then I see kind of another one here, and then as I move across, I have another, so I'm starting to have a couple, you can see, and they arch down onto my eye, and I had kind of ignored that earlier. But now as I'm going to put them in, I'm going to need to pay attention to the fact that I do have lashes there. This is a little bit darker shadow than what I put in before. And so you can see that they're very subtle. I added them in only what I could see from the photograph. Okay, only what I could see from the photograph. Don't make them long and crazy. Just draw the part of them that you can actually physically see. This eye look a little different. Has to do just with the angle of the camera, right? Again, my bottom lashes look a little like this weird shadow down here. And then my top lashes, again, they're kind of a curl. They go down. So they're definitely more of a shading detail. You can see, again, a few of these kind of spiky lines here. They arch down onto my eyeball and become part of the shadow that's out here that goes into the shadow of my hair. So again, you don't want to add overzealous eyelashes. You want to try to be as real to your photo as you can. And that can be the very last thing you add. Like, you can go back and add eyelashes to your eyes at any time. I would say you're better off underdoing your eyelashes than overdoing your eyelashes, because if you overdo your lashes, you know, you'll have that space bug effect, and we don't want that space. You can see now I'm coming out here and notice that the shadow on my forehead is darker on this side too. Just trying to refine some of those shadows. This is your goal for the end of class, is to have your eyes pretty much finished. So you can see my portrait is finished across the eyes. On Monday we will talk about into the nose area of our portrait.